poor to a home, gave my brother and I an amazing education. My brother is now a doctor. They remind me of that. And it's one reason I joined the U.S. Air Force on active duty. I believe I can never give back to America everything this amazing country has given to my family. It's one reason I remain in the reserves. I'm a colonel at LA Air Force Base in El Segundo. And that's one reason I'm in politics, make sure that this dream remains open for people who want to work hard and succeed. After active duty Air Force, actually, while I was in active duty Air Force, I met my beautiful wife. I may have stayed in as a career, but she wasn't going to move every 3 years, so I entered the reserves. And then I went into private practice. I'm also a recovering attorney. I did that for about 5 years. And I was elected to a Torrance City Council, and then the state legislature for 9 years, and now I'm in my 3rd year in Congress, 2nd term. And this year is very different than last term, when we had a real president last term. I knew what this crowd was like, but it was just a test to see what this crowd was like. All right. So I didn't set out to resist our president. I believe we are an exceptional country. It's one reason I joined the military. And shortly after last November's elections, I issued a public statement that basically said one of the great things about America is our peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump won the Electoral College. We should give him a chance to govern. About 2 months later, I concluded I was wrong. And it wasn't because we disagreed on policy. I disagree on policy with Democrats and Republicans on different issues. It was because he was systematically attacking the institutions of our democracy. He was attacking the First Amendment and the free press. He was attacking the legitimacy of the judiciary. He was stifling internal dissent. And then he was lying at a rate I've never seen a human being lie. The Washington Post tracked every statement he made the first 100 days of office, and they concluded he made over 450 false and misleading statements. New York Times, not to be outdone, said, all right, we're gonna track him for 6 months. After 6 months, they reported he made over 800 false and misleading statements. So when that happens, it makes it so that the public now has difficulty understanding what is true and what is false. And to me, that leads us down the road to authoritarianism. That is a danger to the republic, and that's why I resist him. So hopefully he'll change, but until he does, I'm gonna keep speaking truth to power. And I'll talk about 2 issues, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. One is on healthcare. I am on Obamacare. It is not a perfect law. Any law can be improved or updated. I will vote to repeal Obamacare if we can put a better plan in its place. Really stupid to repeal it and put something far worse, which is what the Republicans tried. And you may wonder, how is it that a Congress controlled by Republicans in the House, in the Senate, and a presidency that is controlled by Republicans could not pass through what they wanted and complain about for 7 years, which is to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And I think it has to do with public sentiment. Lincoln had a very good and perceptive quote. He said, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And it was because of calls from you and others across America to senators and House of Representative members, emails and faxes and showing up at town halls and rallies and protests that shifted public opinion and made it very hard for the Republicans to pass through these crazy alternative plans that are far worse. And it kept every single Democrat in line. Not a single Democrat in the House or Senate supported any of the Republican plans. That's an amazing amount of unity. And my view is there was this huge pushback from the American public, and there are ways to stop really stupid things from happening because of public opinion, public sentiment. And that's one reason that I'm here. It's one reason that I do what I do, and hopefully I can get you all to continue to do what you do in pushing back against things that you find are wrong. And the second issue I'm going to talk about, well, a little bit more on healthcare. So the president, now that he's upset that he couldn't get his way, decided to now try and sabotage the Affordable Care Act. So last week, he issued an executive order basically cutting funds to what they're called cost sharing reduction payments. And basically folks who are low income and middle income are gonna get hurt by this. But because the healthcare marketplace is one entity, right? Health insurance companies are sort of one company. So it's not as if there's an Aetna company that just does exchanges, and then there's another Aetna company that does employer-based health coverage. It's the same Aetna. So when you cause Aetna to lose a whole bunch of money and cause a destabilized market, they're going to increase premiums on everyone, including you, including folks on employer-based health plans. So everybody's premium is going to get jacked up because of the executive order that the president put in last week. So we're fighting back against that. There are bipartisan efforts in Congress right now to reverse his executive order. Hopefully that happens. And then the second issue I'm going to talk about is DACA. We have a with a bill, the DREAM Act, that we want to pass into law. I'm a co-author. We're trying to get as many co-authors as we can. It is now up at 200, which means it's bipartisan. We want to get it to 218, and this would make sure that over 800,000 dreamers, undocumented youth, don't get deported to a country they've never seen. If you look at the statistics, over half, actually way more than half of these undocumented youth came here when they were under 7 years of age. And to tell them now that they have to leave America is cruel and harsh. And we have some bipartisan support in Congress to try to reverse what the president wants to do. So those are some of the issues that we're working on, and very excited all of you are here and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Hold on 1 second. I think we just speak a mic.
There it goes.
Is that working? Hello? No? Oh, wait.
I think I got it. Okay, so you covered a lot of your childhood, which we all appreciate. You mentioned you were elected into public office. Was that an active decision that you sought out, or what was it that made you decide that you want to work in public office?
So as a kid, I wanted to be a taxi driver, and my parents actively dissuaded me from doing that. But at some point, I started to realize that we were very lucky that we eventually had a home, that I had a good education, and that this was an amazing country. And I wanted to help give back and help participate in this American experiment that we have. And it's not like I sort of sat there and thought, oh, one day I want to be a member of Congress. That's not sort of what happened. I thought to myself, I want to be in a place where I can help make change and hopefully cause change for the better. So that's sort of what happened. And I was happily, I live in Torrance, so we're in Torrance, and I was happy. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and everything was going fine. Then Assemblymember George Nicano, who had represented Venice for a while as well, called me and said, hey, think about running for Torrance City Council. And that's sort of basically how it started.
Great. Along those lines, I know there are some younger folks here, so would you recommend this type of career path to anybody here?
That's a great question. I would, if you're interested in elected office, you should ask yourself why you're interested in doing that. It is not a normal career. So, for example, I love being with all of you, but I am also away from my wife and 2 kids right now. So you are away from your family a fair amount, and the travel does suck, I have to say, going to DC and back. But on the other hand, you get to do some amazing things. You get to try to help shape public opinion and public sentiment. Every now and then you get to pass a law. Last term I had 7 bills signed into law. And so it's a trade-off, so you have to know why you want to do what you want to do. If you want to cause change, there are lots of ways to do that. Elected office is one of them, but also working in a nonprofit sector, if you're in the private sector, trying to help your business do better, or support charities. There are lots of things you can do to try and cause change, of which being elected official is one of them. If you're interested, afterwards, come talk to me, and hopefully some of you might be interested.
Thank you. So just for the record, we're going through the easy ones and they get harder. So along those lines, I guess, as you mentioned and everybody here knows, it's been a really weird year. So in your opinion, and being as candidly as you possibly can, since you're always on the record, what do you believe are some of the core factors that led our country to a Trump presidency?
So I'm sure historians will write lots of books about exactly what happened last year. You know, so I'll give you sort of my personal opinion of some things I think contributed to what happened. So even before Donald Trump ran, when I was in the state legislature, I started to realize that there were two economies going on in America. There was an economy where if you had a college degree or higher, you were doing okay, or even pretty well. We had a lot of industries that were doing well, whether it's high tech or biotech or healthcare industry or aerospace and so on. But if you didn't have a college degree, the last 2 decades were a disaster for you, and you are mad and angry, and the future that you once saw was a lot dimmer than you thought, and you wanted to change and cause change because the system wasn't working for you. And I think part of that culminated in last November, where you had Donald Trump, who was very good at branding, very good at marketing, talk about, you know, to these people. He was sort of able to tap into an anger across half of America. Bernie Sanders tapped into that same anger too. They just directed it at different things. So Bernie took that anger and directed it at Wall Street and billionaires. Trump took that anger and directed it at people that look like me and immigrants and the establishment. So I think that was part of it. I think the other part is, and we'll never know if this is true. So we know that there are these models that political scientists have always done where they predict who's going to win the White House without regard to who the candidate actually is. So they look at a variety of factors, such as the economy at the time of the election, who controlled the White House, who controlled Congress, and so on. And they consistently predicted that a Republican was going to win the White House because the economy had not quite gotten to where it needed to be uniformly across America. So it could be that a Republican was just going to be in the White House and Donald Trump made it close. Because part of this is, I think, sort of reactions, and you see in politics sort of reactions to what people view as currently happening, and which is why midterms, traditionally, the person in the White House, the party controlling it, loses a bunch of seats because the candidate who wins the White House makes a series of promises. And then 2 years later, the voters realize, that person lied to me. So next November, it doesn't really matter, in my mind, what Donald Trump tweets or says. The voters will know if they have a job. They'll know if the healthcare is better or worse. They'll know if America is in a better place or not. Typically, the promises that the candidate makes are not delivered, and there's a huge backlash and huge reaction, which is now why you see the nonpartisan political report come out for the first time 2 days ago saying that the Democrats now have a better than even chance of flipping the House next November. So I think part of it is cyclical. I think part of it was you had half of America in suffering in a way that they saw the system not working for them.
Okay, so along those lines, you have the cloud of illegitimacy clock that many people of you probably know if you go to his website. So right now, I believe we're at 271 days, 8 hours, and 30 minutes. So seeing that the facts don't seem to have a place in the Trump White House, do you realistically think that we will see an impeachment in this term?
So let's first talk about the clock, right? The clock here. So it's called the cloud of illegitimacy clock. The reason I did that is I realized that
Donald Trump was going to be the first president in history to be in violation of the Constitution the second he finished taking his oath of office. So the Constitution has in there what's known as the Emoluments Clause. And what that basically means is you can't accept gifts and payments, especially from foreign countries and foreign leaders, because of the corrupting influence it could have. That's why the framers put that in there. So Donald Trump has all these businesses all over the world, and he refuses to divest his family from it. And so as a result, every time that someone goes to a Trump business in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or another country, and they want to curry favor with him, they're benefiting him, right? So he's being enriched through all these businesses because people are trying to curry favor with the administration. So there are just all these articles that say, yes, diplomats choose Trump properties to stay in to curry favor with him. And every time he travels, right, to his golf course or to Mar-a-Lago, it's not just him showing up. He has this huge entourage of security, of staff, of press aides, of all these folks, and they're staying there, so they're paying lodging, they're eating, they're drinking, all with taxpayer funds. And he's enriching his family every time he shows up at a Trump property, whether it's for a conference or to golf. And the Constitution prohibits that, which is why there's now a lawsuit going on. So that's why I did the cloud of illegitimacy clock. Now on impeachment, I happen to sit in the House Judiciary Committee, so here's a fun fact. If impeachment were to happen, it would start in that committee. And second fun fact, if you look at the articles of impeachment for Richard Nixon, it wasn't for the underlying crime of burglary of the DNC. It was obstruction of justice. And in my mind, you've got obstruction of justice happening by the President of the United States. So I'll just walk you through one of these charges, which is what I would do if I controlled, if I was in the majority. So obstruction of justice, the statute is really broad. You don't actually have to obstruct justice. You just have to endeavor to influence a federal investigation. So we know that Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who was leading the investigation into Trump-Russia collusion. There's no dispute about that. So then a couple days later, Donald Trump goes on national TV and does the one thing his attorneys would have told him never to do. Which is basically, he said, yeah, I fired Comey because of this Russia thing. And then a week later, the New York Times reports that he told the Russian ambassador in the Oval Office that he felt great pressure from the Russia investigation. He fired the FBI director and he relieved that pressure. The White House, to this day, does not contradict that story. So what do we have here now? We've got the act, right, the firing of the FBI director, and then we have the corrupt intent for the act because the president admitted on national TV and because the White House doesn't dispute a second story about his intent for firing the FBI director. That's straight up obstruction of justice. For impeachment to happen, you would also need, right, it's very political, so you would also need to have either Republicans with a lot of courage to stand up and do it, or Democrats to take back the House. So next November, if Democrats take back the House, I think that would be a factor in it. I also think what Special Counsel Robert Mueller does could make a big difference. It depends on what his investigation reveals. And let me just conclude on this. So when I was in the Air Force, I was a prosecutor. I was an Air Force prosecutor, and Air Force military law is similar to federal law in many respects. So, and it doesn't take a prosecutor to know this. So when Robert Mueller was brought in, right, he looked at all the evidence, and what does he do? Does he go, oh, I need to hire some more investigators, I need to sort of look around and do some more things? No, he hires a bunch of prosecutors. You hire prosecutors because you want to prosecute. All right. And then what does he do? So months later, he then convenes a grand jury you convene a grand jury because you want to indict people. The grand jury, you present information and evidence before them, and then they recommend charges. They can also subpoena information from banks and other organizations. So you can tell a lot about the actions he's taking. If you just look at his actions, my view is he sees criminal behavior, and that's why he's doing the things he's doing. So we're waiting to see what his investigation ultimately would reveal, but I would not be surprised if he starts indicting people at some point.
Thank you. Okay, so a lot of us are feeling pretty helpless, especially in the recent weeks, with everything that it seems like we care about under attack. Women's rights, LGBTQ, travel ban 3.0, healthcare, the Iran deal, gun control, environmental protections. Am I missing anything else?
North Korea.
North Korea, tax reform, you name it. The environment, I said the environment, the fires in Northern California. We're all pretty tired. Puerto Rico.
Afghanistan.
We'll get to Afghanistan, and we got that. We're tired and having a hard time keeping up with everything and everything that we can actually do. We all agree that Trump is a danger to our democracy, but aside from digging like safe houses 500 feet underground, what can we do on a local level to keep our families, our communities, and our democracy safe? And then even more so, another question to tack onto that, how do we get the young people? Like, we are fortunate to be in a district with you as our congressman, but when it comes to midterms, is there anything we can do sitting in a very comfortable district to help influence those other districts that we need to flip?
Thank you for that question. I think you should understand the power each of you has. I remember being really sad on election night all the way to the evening of January 20th. And then I remember waking up on January 21st and seeing these amazing women's marches across America. And I thought, that's the country I know. And there's more of us. And that changed everything. So just showing up, right, to marches and town halls and rallies and protests can make a big difference. Social media can affect people across America. You could, write a tweet that affects people not just here, but also in Ohio, or in Florida, or in Tennessee, or a Facebook post. And then letters to the editor, it's amazing how many people actually read them. And it is true that the LA Times and Washington Post and other papers do get a fair amount of letters to the editor. It's also true they often come from the same people. So if you start writing it, eventually you're going to get one published, and then you can amplify your voice. And again, I do think public opinion matters a lot in a democracy. So, for example, Tom Price is no longer Secretary of Health and Human Services. Representative Ruben Gallego and I, he's out of Arizona, we went on the floor, we did this whole thing on Tom Price. We had like these pictures of his private jet, big private jet. And we talked about the amount of money he spent, $400,000 of taxpayers' money to fly from DC to Philadelphia, DC to Miami. I mean, there's like 20 nonstops, right, to all these places. And then you had newspapers and TV also talking about this. And eventually the public pressure was so much that he resigned. You saw just recently Republican Representative Tom Marino of Pennsylvania withdraw his name from drug czar. Because of 60 Minutes and the Washington Post reporting that he, championed this bill that basically made it much harder for the Drug Enforcement Agency to crack down on opioid abuse and pharmaceuticals. It actually sort of made me sick reading that story. That was how broken, at least in that case, the system was. But you do see, right, the administration responding to public pressure and public sentiment. You see members of Congress and senators responding to public opinion and public sentiment. It's one reason that Michael Flynn is no longer at the White House, Steve Bannon is no longer at the White House, John Spicer is no longer at the White House, Reince Priebus is no longer in the White House. I mean, I can go down a list, right? So there are things that we could do as long as we are sort of smart about it, but also there is an inflection point next November where if we take back the House, I think we can mitigate and shorten this national nightmare by half. And so to do that, you would need to flip 24 seats. In 23 of those seats, Hillary Clinton won last term. An additional 9, Barack Obama won twice. So in 30-some seats, the Democratic challenger either starts out ahead or at least even. There's an additional 30 seats where the Democratic challenger is within 3 to 5 points of taking over that seat. If you look at voting behavior this past year, there's been seismic shifts in voting behavior of between 14 to 20 points difference, where the Democrat in the election got 14, 20 points higher than in the last election. So next November, if we had a 20-point shift in all congressional districts, 123 Republicans would lose their seats. We're not going to have a 20-point shift in all congressional districts. But if we just had a fifth of that, we'd take over the House by a lot. There is a lot of momentum, and within California, 7 of those 23 seats Hillary Clinton won are in California. 5 were in Southern California. My colleagues recently elected me as vice chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. My responsibility is the Western region, so it's Nevada, California, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii. I keep telling them to send me to Hawaii to check it out. I haven't done it. But 5 of these seats are in Southern California, so we did something we never did before. We moved the entire DCCC Western Region office to Irvine, California. And we're making a big push to try to flip these seats. I have gone to 2 congressional districts, so Representative Rohrabacher refuses to do a town hall in his district. So a couple months ago, I went in and did one for him. So that was a lot of fun. And then this past weekend, I did one in Representative Steve Knight's district. And then let me conclude with this. I have created their very creatively named Lieu Leadership PAC. And it is designed to help candidates flip the House. It can't be used in my campaign, but when contributions are made, I take the contributions and I give them to candidates running in California, Nevada, and other places where we're trying to flip this seat. So there are donation envelopes on the table outside, and then my staff has some donation envelopes if any of you are interested. And then feel free to, as the campaign starts gearing up next year, to go to these districts and help work on the campaigns.
Okay, so you mentioned tweets. Can we talk about those?
Sure.
So you're known to have quite the fingers when it comes to Twitter. Let's take a look at some of our favorites. Calling the president out on his broken promises. Dear real Donald Trump, perhaps you didn't read the budget you submitted. It makes over $800 billion in Medicaid cuts and violates your promise. Reminding him of Congress' constitutional mandate. Under our Constitution, the job of Congress is not to protect you, it is to check and balance you. One of my favorites was the note you gave him for his first visit overseas. Cheat sheet for first overseas visit. Don't leak classified information. Israel equals ally. Russia equals not ally. G7 is not a Gulf reference. Don't talk about Muslim ban with the Saudis. Actually, don't talk about Muslims ever again. Heads up for the Pope Francis meeting. He knows climate change is real, hates your proposed wall, and is not a fan of locker room talk. I can go on and on, but for the sake of time, one of the questions that was submitted was really asking, so how do your colleagues across the aisle react to your tweets? Do you ever think that you're crossing the line? Is there a line anymore? Is bipartisan behavior dead and gone?
So there's different questions in there. So let me answer the last one on bipartisan behavior. So before I went to Congress, I thought, oh, we fight a lot. And there's a lot of fighting in Congress. And now that I'm in Congress, that's true. We do fight a lot. It's also true a whole bunch of bills are being passed and signed into law that you don't read about for the same reason you don't read about planes that land. Doesn't sell newspapers, doesn't sell TV ads. And I think it's somewhat skewed because the media just keeps talking about stories of conflict. So there are stories of conflict, but there's also laws being passed that help different Americans across our country, whether it's veterans or other folks. And so there's two things going on. So there are areas where there is bipartisan agreement, or there's areas where the issue is just not partisan. So for example, cybersecurity. I have worked on cybersecurity issues with Republicans. There's no such thing as a Republican cybersecurity attack, right, or a Democratic cybersecurity defense. It's really not a partisan issue. So there are issues like that as well. And then there are issues where, so politics is sort of like a circle. Sometimes you're so right, you're left, and vice versa. So these issues where you have very interesting alliances of really liberal Democrats and Tea Party Republicans. When I ran for Congress the first time, one of my main campaign ads was that the National Security Agency was violating your rights. They were basically seizing everybody's phone records, including yours, for up to 7 years. They knew who you called, who called you, the duration of those calls, and when those calls were made. So you could, for example, look at this database and know who called a suicide prevention hotline, who called a rape crisis hotline, or who called whoever. And to me, that was just a violation of Americans' privacy. And the Fourth Amendment is pretty clear. It says, look, to get this information, you need a warrant. And I can guarantee you the NSA did not have over 300 million warrants on individuals. So last term, Congress did something it doesn't normally do. We reined back the intelligence agencies and said, you can't do that anymore. And that was led by very liberal Democrats and Tea Party Republicans. And so you get issues like that. So I think there is still bipartisan behavior. Now on sort of really high profile issues like healthcare, then yes, you can still get a lot of conflict. And then in terms of Twitter, you know, I was brought up to stand up to bullies, and I saw the president acting like a bully. I think it's amazingly ironic that the First Lady's main issue is taking on cyberbullying. And my view was, look, if the President of the United States is going to lie or mislead people, I'm just going to point that out to the American public. And I remember it all started because I just got angry, right? And every other day I wake up and I read something, I'll get angry. But I also realized no one wants to read like an angry person on Twitter. It was like the president sounds like an angry person, right? So I would sort of calm down and I would think about a way to write it so that it didn't sound so angry. And then I decided every now and then to use humor, otherwise it's just too dark all the time. But I also thought that humor and satire can point out truth in a way that other methods sometimes can't. One of my favorite literary works is A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. I thought it was very effective. And so I try to do that because the administration provides so much material to work with. But that's sort of how I began. And you know, I don't want to be doing this, right? I don't want to be trying to respond to stupid tweets by the president. It's not good for America, it's not good for the country. So this is not a position I want to be in, but unless the president changes, that's what I'm going to keep on doing.
Well, for right now, we can all really appreciate that. Gives us some sanity in the day, I know. So moving on to Middle East. Somebody mentioned Afghanistan in the office, or I mean in the audience, and that's a question that we do have. When are we going to get out of Afghanistan?
That is a great question. So I support Barbara Lee's bill, which is to basically sunset their authorization for the use of military force and have a debate on a new one. We've been fighting an endless war in Afghanistan, 16 years. By the way, I don't know why the president thinks that it's so clear that we can win a war in North Korea if we can't even win in Afghanistan, a far weaker country, 16 years later. I opposed
increasing troops to Afghanistan. My view is that we need to have a debate in Congress on this, and we need to have updated authorizations for the use of military force.
Thank you. This question actually came through several times. So many of your supporters here are actually pretty disappointed with the co-sponsorship of HR 1697, the Israel anti-boycott bill, claiming that its provisions clash with your otherwise strong support for human rights. And although you're a constitutional lawyer, you back this legislation even though the ACLU said it threatens free speech rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. Can you explain your decision to co-sponsor this bill, and do you have any plans to withdraw your sponsorship?
Sure, happy to answer that. So you may want to ask yourself, how is it that so many Democrats co-sponsored this bill? Well, it's because when we looked at it, it actually doesn't do what the ACLU said it did many months later. So, first of all, at the time of co-sponsorship, there was no opposition from the ACLU. And what the bill actually does is it sort of adds a provision to current law, basically about international organizations. So everything the ACLU alleges is actually existing law. It's in the law right now. And if it were unconstitutional, the Supreme Court would have struck it down, but they didn't. So the ACLU's interpretation of existing law is different than many of our interpretations of existing law. Now, having said that, we have gone to the author of the bill, Senator Ben Cardin, and said, hey, now that the ACLU has come out with these objections, will you please look at your bill and look at amending it so that you can hopefully get to a win-win with ACLU and other groups. So they are now looking at amendments to the bill. It would have been nice, before all these Democrats got on the bill, had these organizations sort of said, hey, we oppose it. But I think one reason no one did is because the bill does a very small thing. Everything that people object to is already existing law, but when they wrote the bill, existing law is actually printed. And so it looks like, oh, there's all this bad stuff, which is already in the law. And the Supreme Court has interpreted it differently than what the ACLU is saying it means. But happy to look at amendments to the bill, and then I'll make a decision after those amendments are as to what I'll do with the bill.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to healthcare quickly. So you mentioned obviously what had been going on for the last several weeks with Trump's executive orders last week. So is there anything that we can do to protect coverage options in California and protect the sale of junk insurance that provides little to no benefits, especially to those with chronic or ongoing health issues?
Yes, so California has taken some steps to protect people from what Donald Trump is trying to do. So Cover California has done a pretty good job. And even though the actions of Trump are deeply disturbing, people in California are going to get more protections than if you were, let's say, in the state of Alabama. Now, in addition to his executive order cutting these cost sharing reduction payments, he also issued a second executive order that basically said, we're going to let these association plans occur without having to follow the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. So association plans are plans sort of offered by trade associations and so on. And these plans often, I call them fake insurance because they don't actually cover you when you get sick. So here's a good analogy. How many of you would buy car insurance if it didn't cover you if you got into an accident? It'd be really stupid. Well, before the Affordable Care Act, health insurance companies would sell those insurance plans where if you had to go to the hospital, you weren't covered. Where if you had to get emergency room treatment, you weren't covered. Most people, when they buy insurance, would think, okay, I'm buying insurance in case I get sick and have to go to the emergency room or I have to go to the hospital. So the Affordable Care Act has what's known as these essential benefits requirements that says, look, if you're gonna have an insurance plan, you can't sell fake insurance. It's gotta have these coverage provisions in it. So Donald Trump's executive order basically allows a whole bunch of plans to not follow that requirement. And then the problem is not only will you have a bunch of consumers buy fake insurance, it then siphons people off the existing risk pools, which then jacks up premiums on all of us as well. So it's really clear that the president is trying to just really mess up the healthcare system. Now, the polling on all of this is actually does give me faith in America. First of all, the polling shows that most of us are not morons. That most of us actually understand the president of the United States is trying to sabotage the healthcare system. That people understand that he is intentionally trying to hurt healthcare, and that premiums are going to rise because of Donald Trump, and not because of Barack Obama. So I think that people get this and understand it, and I think Republican legislators understand this as well, which is why there's a bipartisan effort in Congress to try to reverse what Donald Trump is doing. So again, phone calls and emails, social media to not just your representative, but to Speaker Ryan, Mitch McConnell at the White House would be helpful. But again, public opinion can change things.
Okay, moving on to natural resources. Do you have any plans to place limitations on out-of-state companies who take our oil and let their operation destroy our ocean and the creatures here?
So I don't know if I quite understand the question, but I'll give you the best.
I was
answer.
hoping you did.
The best answer I can. I believe that the days of fossil fuels are dwindling. The first bill I authored in Congress. So in the state legislature, I was a co-author of California's landmark Global Warming Solutions Act, AB 32. And my first bill in Congress takes that law in California and tries to replicate it nationwide. And so my view is greenhouse gas emissions are the biggest threat to America and to the world. And whatever I can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I will. I'm a big proponent of solar, of wind, of renewable energies. So I would oppose if that was happening. I'm not exactly sure of the exact context in which it's happening, but my view has always been we need to switch to a renewable, clean energy source for America, and then get the world to do that. And that's how we make sure that we don't have climate change disaster.
And California is leading the way as far as the states are concerned from renewable energy and solar power, is that correct?
Yes. California has shown, in fact, that you can have really strong environmental laws and a really strong economy. Our economy actually went from 8th in the world to now 6th in the world at the same time that we tightened our environmental laws.
Okay, so let's talk about Iran. Thank you for proactively drafting H.R. 669 and S2000 legislature with Senator Markey to prohibit the president from launching a nuclear first strike without a declaration of war by Congress. You did that in January, mind you, long before we withdrew from the Iran deal, or not withdrew, but whatever we're doing with the Iran deal right now. Do you have any idea, can you shed any insight to us about when this piece of legislature is actually going to the floor? Is it possible to get a vote sooner, like tomorrow?
No, thank you. So, by the way, just so you know, I oppose the president's decertification of the Iran deal. Now, in terms of the nuclear issue, how many of you know what it takes to launch nuclear weapons in America? Okay, so a few. So I'm going to tell you how it's done. It takes the approval of the National Command Authority, which sounds really impressive until you read it. It's two people. It's the president and his political appointee, the Secretary of Defense. And under the law, the Secretary of Defense cannot legally object to the president's order to launch nuclear weapons. He just has to execute it. It's a ministerial act. So once the president gives an order, the Secretary of Defense executes it, the order goes down the military chain of command, and missiles launch. It is that easy. The judiciary is not involved, Congress is not involved, no other member of the president's cabinet is even involved.
So Senator Markey and I looked at this and thought this is just flat out unconstitutional. So if you look at the Constitution, the framers went to great lengths to stop the president. They created an entire judicial branch to be a check and balance on the president. They created an entire legislative branch to be a check and balance on the president. And then they gave the greatest power they knew at that time, the power to declare war, to Congress. There's no way, in our opinion, they would have given one person the ability to launch thousands of nuclear weapons that can kill hundreds of millions of people in less than an hour and not call that war. If you don't call that war, you've just read it out of the Constitution. And so our bill, as Maria said, is very simple. It basically says, you, Mr. President, cannot launch a nuclear first strike without first getting congressional approval. Every time the president does something crazy, we get more co-sponsors. I'm pleased to report that it's now the bipartisan HR 669. And we now have editorial boards from the New York Times to Sacramento Bee and others writing in favor of it. And part of this, Senator Markey and I actually introduced this. We did do it in January, but we also introduced this last year when everyone here believed Hillary Clinton was going to be president. We just viewed that this was a systematic fix that needed to be done. Regardless of who was president, you just can't have 5 people involved in destroying the world. So our view was we need to make sure that we correct this defect in our system. But now it's more urgent because of who actually is president. And academics and members of Congress and foreign policy leaders always knew that a very small amount of people could destroy the world, but they always relied on the president as the check and balance, that the president's own character and judgment would make sure this never happened. And for most of our history, that was true. So whether you supported, well, actually, I know we all supported, but whether you supported, McCain or Obama or Bush or Bill Clinton, you didn't think any of them were possibly crazy. But we have someone in the White House who there are legitimate questions about his stability and how impulsive he is and how angry he gets and how he doesn't listen to his staff and how he doesn't look at facts the same way you and I look at facts and how he just repeatedly lies. So because of those questions, it makes people wonder, can we just have one person responsible for our entire nuclear arsenal? And I think as more and more people realize this, we get more and more support. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we could get enough Republicans to support it, that it could hopefully become law.
Hopefully next month.
When is this happening? I'm sorry.
We'll save time for questions in a minute.
Definitive answer.
For the sake of time, we just kind of need to keep moving. So can we speak about gun control? In the wake of the mass shooting in Las Vegas, it seems Congress is only considering regulatory options to regulate the sale of bump stocks, a position that has been endorsed by the NRA. Will you push for federal gun control legislation that would limit the sale and access to firearms and other weapons of war to minimize the likelihood of more deadly mass shootings while also protecting communities from the epidemic of daily gun violence in this country?
Yes, I participated in last year's gun sit-in in the House of Representatives. Had a lot of fun doing that. We were able to actually, as a result, I get a lot more Republican co-sponsors on gun safety legislation. I am a co-author of the bill to ban bump stocks. I'm also a co-author of a bill on background checks. I pretty much support all reasonable gun safety legislation. In the state legislature, I pretty much supported every piece of gun safety legislation that came before me. I realized after working on this issue for many years that it's really no longer, for many legislators, an issue of logic or rationality. Because I'll talk to a Republican member, and their view is basically the way we solve this is to give more people more guns. That they believe we have a safer society if all of you right now had a gun. And I don't doubt that
they sincerely hold that belief, I think it's wrong, but we're just not going to be able to bridge that gap. And what this then ends up happening is simply it's purely about power. Can we take back the House? Can we get Democrats in the Senate and in Congress who will then, support and vote on this legislation? So it's not a surprise in California, which Democrats control the legislature. We do pass strong gun safety legislation. So I think right now, in my view, the debates sort of go around in circles. I just don't think we'll ever cross this huge chasm between two very different views of the world. It's simply about, in my mind, who happens to be in power, in government at the time, and can they get a law through?
Okay. The last question I have for you, and then I want to open this up for a couple questions from the audience. Bring it back locally. So you mentioned everything that you're doing with Dreamers to help pass the legislation there to protect them to stay here. Venice and Los Angeles County represent a beautiful bubble of diversity. I am also an immigrant. There's many immigrants in this audience. What can we do to stop the marginalization of minority and underrepresented communities that are under attack on an almost daily basis by this White House administration? And what are ways that are most effective to make our voices heard in Washington? We make a lot of calls to our congressmen, but is there anything else that we can do on a local level aside from handing out Know Your Rights flyers at bus stops that we've done before?
I think telling stories can be quite effective. So if you yourself have a compelling story, or if you have a friend that has a compelling story and you can take an Apple iPhone and just film it for 2 minutes and put it on social media, I think that would be helpful. By the way, here's a little fact. If your video is under 2 minutes, 12 seconds, it goes on autoplay on Twitter, which means they'll just start running. So short videos, I think, get more views, and you can just sort of start putting it out on social media. So I think getting people to try to focus on the individual harm that's going to come to people if they were to be deported. Just getting facts out there would be helpful, right? You have an administration that has this entire narrative that's just false, right? Their narrative is immigrants commit crimes. The actual facts are that people born in America commit higher rates of crimes than foreign-born Americans. It's not even disputed, it's just a fact. They have a narrative that refugees, right, commit crimes. That Donald Trump reduced the number of refugees we're letting in. So here are the facts on that. The number of Americans killed in the United States by a refugee committing a terrorist attack is exactly 0 in our entire history. Any refugee from anywhere. The Cato Institute, a think tank, last year did a study and said your chances of being killed by a refugee during a terrorist attack on American soil is about 1 in 3.6 billion. So to put that in perspective, your chances of being struck by lightning twice are 1 in 9 million. So if you do the calculation, there's a 40,000% chance higher that you'd be struck by lightning twice before you die in a terrorist attack caused by a refugee on American soil. So now you have this administration not only harming refugees, but also spending all these ridiculous federal resources on essentially a non-existent problem. And to the extent we could just get basic facts out there, I think it'd be very helpful. And again, I think a lot does come to public sentiment and public opinion and people pushing back. And also the judiciary has been very helpful. I think they've been doing their duty and being their third branch of government. Right now, there are large parts of Donald Trump's Muslim ban are not being enforced because courts have repeatedly struck it down. So just recently, a second district judge in Maryland struck down version 3.0 of Trump's Muslim ban. Helping organizations and nonprofits that go fight in the judiciary would be great. By the way, I am a monthly donor to the ACLU. I'm also a monthly donor to the Southern Poverty Law Center and other groups that go in and fight for your rights in the judiciary. So helping that branch of government is also very helpful, as well as groups that participate in that branch of government.
Thank you. Questions from the group? We have time for two, so I'm sorry, let me stand up so I don't just see the front two. You had your hand first, bud?
Can you explain a little bit about how protected people are, since we are a sanctuary state and we have sanctuary cities? I'm not sure I'm really clear on how protected the people of California are in those spaces, because it doesn't seem to me that they are.
So questions on sanctuary state and sanctuary cities. Those laws and policies apply to basically what the local law enforcement personnel can or can't do. But they don't apply to ICE agents or federal personnel. So there's basically nothing that the LAPD or state law enforcement can do to stop a deportation from happening. If ICE agents came in and wanted to deport someone, sanctuary state has more. Sanctuary states have more to do with. Look, let's say LAPD arrests someone for DUI. We're not going to have the police officer act as an immigration agent, and then take this person to ICE just because they think the person might be undocumented. So that it has to do with that. Yeah.
Second question. You know what, I want to go to the person in the back.
Sorry. Yeah, with the glasses? The gentleman?
Hi there, Congressman. Please take my question. My question is actually a partial request. Will you please be the third congressman, Democratic congressman, who found articles of impeachment in Congress?
Are you talking about impeachment?
Articles of impeachment.
Right. So just so you know, there are 3 people that either have introduced or are about to introduce articles of impeachment. My view, what I've been saying, is that we need to have the Judiciary Committee now hold hearings on these articles of impeachment and do what we're supposed to do, which is do investigation into these articles of impeachment. And again, a lot of this does actually depend on public opinion. And so I think next year is going to be different than this year. I think for a lot of people that don't necessarily follow politics a lot, they still are of the mindset that, well, the president sort of just got in. He hasn't even completed a year in office. It's still sort of a little early, and you're already trying to take him out. I hope he changes. I don't think he will. So next year, when this same crazy stuff keeps happening, and then you start seeing indictments happen because of the special counsel and so on, then I think you might get public opinion to change. I think you might get a groundswell for impeachment. And so let me just conclude really quick on Russia. And it could be very complicated. So let me just try to boil it down to 3 simple things. There's 1,000 stories about this, but here's 3 undisputed facts. One, we know that Russia engaged in a massive cyber hacking and influence campaign on American democracy. There is an unclassified report that you can read by our intelligence agencies. So if you go on the internet and you search for unclassified intelligence report Russia, it's the first document that pops up. It's about 17 pages. I recommend you read it. The conclusions are deeply disturbing. The conclusions are that Russia engaged in this massive operation to undermine faith in US democracy, to help Donald Trump, to hurt Secretary Clinton. I read the classified report, I went to classified briefings, and I can tell you the classified information supports the conclusions of the unclassified report. We know that happened. Second thing we know happened is the Trump campaign went to great lengths to be pro-Russian. They went to great lengths to make sure that the Republican platform did not have anything in there about Ukraine's defenses, about the US helping Ukraine. They went against the advice of every Republican and conservative foreign policy expert. They continue to make pro-Russian statements both during the campaign as well as during the administration in early parts and even sometimes now. So that happened. Third thing we know happened is we know that there were communications between the two camps. Communications that the Trump campaign had denied, where for the longest time, the president and others said, oh no, there were no communications, no meetings. Now, because of the free press, we know that there are a lot of these meetings, there are a lot of these communications. So what do we have here? Well, we have these three things now. We've got the Russians benefiting the Trump campaign, we've got the Trump campaign benefiting the Kremlin, and then we've got communications between the two. So to me, that leads to only three possible conclusions. Either Trump campaign officials were naive and unwitting participants in a massive influence operation, which is possible, but I think unlikely, especially based on the special counsel's actions and what he's doing. Or second, maybe the Trump campaign officials knew what was going on or suspected what was going on, but they didn't want to ask too many questions. It was sort of a nod, nod, wink, wink sort of thing. Or third, there was coordination. If it was either coordination or they knew what was going on and sort of play along with it, then I think there's violations of federal law there. So if that were to happen and the special counsel reveals it, then I could also see impeachment proceedings happening. And so with that, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. And just to remind everyone as well, as you're exiting the building, please don't talk in the lobby. There is an acting class going on in the theater. Thank you.